Greetings, my friends, new and old. My name is Sage, and I'm here to guide you through the history and lore behind the wizarding world. Feel free to get cozy and relax, or even fade into deep slumber as we dive into this video's theme: the most powerful dark wizards in history. When wizarding historians speak of dark wizards, the conversation often begins with fear and ends with spectacle. Names are remembered because of wars fought, lives lost, and scars left behind on magical society. Yet power, in its truest sense, has never been as simple as the ability to cast the most destructive spell or command the largest following. In the long winding history of the wizarding world, dark power has taken many forms, some loud and catastrophic, others quiet, insidious, and enduring long after the wizard themselves has vanished from the world. To understand who the most powerful dark wizards truly were, it is necessary first to understand what power meant to the magical communities that lived under their shadows. In some eras, power was measured by how completely a wizard could defy death itself. In others, it was defined by the ability to reshape ideology, rewrite laws, or twist the beliefs of entire generations. There were dark witches and wizards whose names became synonymous with terror, and others whose influence seeped so deeply into wizarding institutions that their beliefs survived even after their spells had faded. Dark magic, as defined by the Department of Mysteries and earlier magical scholars, is not merely magic used for harm. It is magic that violates natural boundaries, corrodes the soul of its practitioner, and often leaves lasting damage on places, objects, and people. This is why sites touched by powerful dark magic rarely recover fully, and why artifacts forged in darkness continue to exert influence long after their creators are gone. Power, then, is not simply the moment of casting, but the longevity of consequence. It is also important to separate raw magical ability from historical significance. Many witches and wizards possessed extraordinary talent without ever changing the course of history. Conversely, some dark wizards were not uniquely gifted in every branch of magic, yet altered the world through persistence, obsession, and a willingness to cross lines others would not. The most powerful among them combined technical skill with vision, cruelty, and an understanding of fear as a tool. Throughout wizarding history, fear has always magnified power. A curse becomes more effective when people believe it is unstoppable. A name becomes dangerous when it's spoken in whispers. Dark wizards understood this instinctively, long before ministries attempted to codify magical law. Some cultivated mystery deliberately, obscuring their origins and methods so that their enemies could never be certain how to defeat them. Others sought visibility, ensuring that their presence dominated conversation and imagination alike. Another crucial element of dark power lies in innovation. The dark wizards who are remembered are often those who did something no one had dared before. They invented spells, rituals, or ideologies that expanded the boundaries of what magic could achieve. These innovations were rarely acts of curiosity alone. They were driven by fear of death, hunger for control, or the belief that the world itself was flawed and needed reshaping by force. Power also manifests in legacy. Some dark practitioners died quietly, but their work lived on through students, descendants, or institutions moulded in their image. Others ensured their immortality through far more literal means, binding fragments of themselves to the world in ways that defied natural law. In both cases, the true measure of power is not how dramatically a wizard fell, but how difficult it was to erase them afterward. It is tempting to view dark wizards as aberrations, monsters set apart from ordinary magical society. Yet history shows that they often emerge from familiar places, respected families, prestigious schools, moments of political upheaval or cultural fear. Their darkness is rarely sudden. It grows gradually, fed by resentment, ideology, and the belief that their actions are justified by a higher purpose. As we move through the lives of the most powerful dark wizards in wizarding history, a pattern begins to emerge. Each believed they were acting with clarity in a world they perceived as broken. Each crossed a threshold from which there was no return, and each, in their own way, left marks that the wizarding world is still reckoning with today. Long before ministries, schools, and standardized spellcraft, there lived a wizard whose name would become a warning whispered through centuries of magical study. Herpo the Foul stands among the earliest recorded dark wizards, not because his deeds were the most visible, but because they were foundational. In an age when magic itself was still being explored and categorized, Herpo ventured into territory that others feared even to imagine. Very little is known about Herpo's personal life, and that absence is itself revealing. Ancient magical records rarely preserved biographical detail unless a figure's actions demanded it. What survives about Herpo is not who he loved, where he lived, or how he was educated, but what he created. That alone speaks volumes. He was a Greek dark wizard, living in a time when magic was deeply entwined with philosophy, myth, and early experimentation. Herpo is most famously remembered as the first wizard known to have created a Horcrux. This single act places him in a category apart from nearly every other dark practitioner in history. A Horcrux is not merely a dark object or cursed artifact. It is a deliberate act of soul mutilation, achieved through murder and sealed through complex, deeply forbidden magic. To conceive of such a process required not only cruelty, but a radical reconceptualization of life, death, and identity. The creation of a Horcrux suggests that Herpo's greatest fear was not defeat, but finality. Death to him was not an inevitability to be accepted or even postponed, but an enemy to be conquered outright. This mindset would echo through the centuries, resurfacing most famously in the Ambitions of Tom Riddle. Yet Herpo arrived at this conclusion alone, without precedent, guided only by obsession and experimentation. In addition to his work with Horcruxes, Herpo was also the first recorded wizard to successfully breed a basilisk. This alone would have secured his place in magical history. Basilisks are classified among the most dangerous magical creatures known, their creation outlawed precisely because of the devastation they can cause. That Herpo not only conceived of the process, but perfected it, demonstrates a mastery of dark magical theory and biological manipulation that remains largely unmatched. Herpo's status as a Parselmouth further deepens his significance. Parseltongue is an exceedingly rare magical ability, passed down through bloodlines rather than learned. This suggests that Herpo may stand at the root of a lineage that would later include Salazar Slytherin, and generations afterward, Lord Voldemort himself. If so, then Herpo's influence was not limited to his own lifetime, but flowed through centuries of wizarding history. What makes Herpo particularly chilling is not only what he achieved, but how little opposition he seems to have faced. In an era without centralized magical authority, a wizard of his capability could operate in near total isolation. There were no auras to pursue him, no ministries to outlaw his research. Knowledge itself was the only restraint, and Herpo pushed beyond what knowledge could safely contain. There is no reliable record of Herpo's death, and this uncertainty has fueled centuries of speculation. If his Horcrux was never destroyed, then the possibility of his continued existence, however diminished or altered, cannot be entirely dismissed. This lingering question reinforces the true horror of his work. He did not merely seek power in life, he sought permanence. Herpo the Foul represents the quiet beginning of dark supremacy in wizarding history. He did not wage wars or command armies. He changed the rules. Every dark wizard who followed, every forbidden ritual studied or feared, exists in a world reshaped by the boundaries Herpo first shattered. Salazar Slytherin occupies a unique position in wizarding history, straddling the line between founder and fanatic, visionary and extremist. Unlike many dark wizards whose influence grew in opposition to established institutions, Slytherin helped build one of the most important institutions in the magical world. His power was not limited to the spells he cast in life, but embedded into the very framework of magical education for centuries to come. Born sometime in the 10th century, Salazar emerged during a period of deep instability for magical communities across Britain. Muggle persecution was widespread, and fear shaped daily life for witches and wizards. In this environment, distrust of non-magical people was not uncommon. What set Salazar apart was the degree to which he allowed that fear to harden into ideology. For him, magic was not merely a gift, but a birthright, one that needed protection through exclusion. As a wizard, Salazar was formidable. He was a parcel mouth, a trait so rare that it immediately placed him among the most unusual magical practitioners of his era. This ability allowed him to communicate with serpents, creatures long associated with ancient and dangerous magic. His affinity for snakes was not symbolic alone, it was practical, lethal, and deliberate. Salazar's skill extended beyond innate talents. He was an accomplished legilimens, capable of penetrating the minds of others, and an expert in charms and enchantments. His involvement in the creation of the Sorting Hat demonstrates his advanced understanding of long-term magical constructs, spells designed to persist, adapt, and function independently of their creators. This kind of magic requires foresight and precision, qualities that defined much of Salazar's work. The Chamber of Secrets stands as the most infamous testament to his darkness. Hidden deep beneath Hogwarts, constructed in secret, and protected by both physical concealment and magical complexity, the chamber was designed to outlast Salazar himself. Within it, he placed a basilisk, a creature capable of mass murder, intended to be unleashed by one of his heirs against students he deemed unworthy of magical education. What makes this act particularly chilling is its patience. Salazar did not act immediately. He planned for a future in which his ideology would be vindicated, trusting that time itself would deliver his weapon into the right hands. This long-term thinking marks a level of strategic darkness rarely matched. He was willing to let generations pass if it meant his beliefs would one day be enforced. Salazar's departure from Hogwarts was not marked by battle, but by rupture. His fellow founders rejected his demands to exclude Muggle-born students entirely. In response, he chose to leave rather than compromise, but not before ensuring that his presence would linger. The Sorting Hat continued to reflect his values, favouring ambition, cunning, and blood purity long after his death. His legacy endured through his descendants, most notably the Gaunt family, whose obsession with blood purity and Parseltongue traced directly back to Salazar. Through them, his ideology persisted in increasingly unstable and destructive forms, culminating in the rise of Lord Voldemort. In this way, Salazar's power extended far beyond his own life, shaping not just institutions, but bloodlines and belief systems. Salazar Slytherin was not a dark wizard in the conventional sense of open warfare or overt tyranny. His darkness was quieter, embedded, and systemic. He proved that power could be preserved not only through spells, but through structures that influence how future generations think, sort, and judge one another. If Salazar represents ideological darkness embedded in institutions, then Ekristis represents the raw, unfiltered horror of isolation and experimentation. Little is known about Ekristis as a person, and even less about his origins. What is known is enough to secure his place among the most disturbing dark wizards in history. Ekristis lived during the 15th century and is remembered almost entirely for what he did to a small, unremarkable island in the North Sea. Before his arrival, the island was empty, forgotten, and uncharted. Afterward, it became one of the most cursed locations in the wizarding world. This transformation alone speaks to the scale of his dark influence. Ekristis was a practitioner of the most extreme forms of dark magic, drawn to secrecy and solitude. Upon discovering the island, he placed powerful concealment charms upon it, ensuring that no one else could find it intentionally. This allowed him to operate without interference, a common pattern among dark practitioners who wish to push magic beyond ethical boundaries. He lured Muggle sailors to the island, imprisoning them within a fortress he constructed through unknown means. There he subjected them to prolonged torture and experimentation. These acts were not committed for conquest or ideology, but for exploration of suffering itself. Ekristis treated pain as a magical resource, something to be studied, refined, and exploited. It is widely believed that the Dementors originated from the aftermath of these experiments. While Dementors cannot be killed and do not reproduce in any conventional biological sense, they are drawn to places saturated with despair. The concentration of misery created by Ekristis was so intense that it either created Dementors or permanently anchored them to the island. When Ekristis eventually died, the concealment charms faded, revealing the fortress to the wider wizarding world. Those who investigated refused to speak of what they found. The Dementors had claimed the structure as their home, and the walls themselves seemed infused with agony. The decision was made not to destroy the fortress, out of fear that doing so would unleash the creatures upon the mainland. This fortress would later become Azkaban, the wizarding prison whose reputation for despair eclipses all others. Though Ekristis never ruled from a throne or commanded followers, his actions shaped centuries of magical justice and punishment. Every soul imprisoned in Azkaban suffered in a space created by his cruelty. Ekristis demonstrates that power does not require recognition. He changed the physical and emotional geography of the wizarding world, creating a place so saturated with dark magic that it altered policy, ethics, and fear itself for generations. His legacy is one of environment rather than ideology, a reminder that darkness can persist long after its creator is gone. Gormleth Gaunt represents a different kind of dark power, one that does not rely on armies, institutions, or grand ideological movements, but instead flourishes within the intimate confines of family. Her cruelty was personal, deliberate, and sustained over years rather than moments. Where other dark wizards sought to dominate the world, Gormleth sought to dominate blood, belief, and obedience. Born into the House of Gaunt in the late 16th century, Gormleth inherited one of the most infamous lineages in wizarding history. The Gaunts trace their ancestry directly to Salazar Slytherin, and with that heritage came an obsession with purity, Parseltongue, and isolation from broader magical society. By Gormleth's time, the family's fanaticism had already calcified into something brittle and dangerous. Gormleth possessed the ability to speak Parseltongue, a mark of both her ancestry and her magical capability. She also wielded Salazar Slytherin's original wand for a time, a relic of immense historical and symbolic power. To Gormleth, this inheritance was not merely a connection to the past, but a mandate. She believed herself chosen to preserve what she saw as the true wizarding bloodline at any cost. Her descent into darkness became most evident through her relationship with her sister and her niece, Iseult Sire. When Gormleth discovered that her sister had married a muggle and was raising a child in an environment of tolerance and cooperation, she interpreted it as a betrayal severe enough to warrant death. She murdered both her sister and brother-in-law by burning their home, an act she justified as necessary purification. In a chilling contradiction, Gormleth spared Iseult not out of mercy, but possession. She abducted her niece and raised her in isolation, subjecting her to constant exposure to dark magic and ideological conditioning. Iseult was denied a wand and formal education, ensuring her dependence and obedience. This prolonged psychological domination is among the most disturbing acts attributed to any dark witch. Gormleth's power lay in control rather than spectacle. She used fear as a daily tool, reinforcing her worldview through punishment and deprivation. Her magic was not explosive or theatrical, but precise and oppressive. For years she maintained total authority over Iseult's life, shaping her reality through coercion. When Iseult eventually escaped, Gormleth's obsession did not end. She hunted her niece across continents, driven by the belief that blood purity justified endless violence. Her pursuit culminated in North America, where Iseult had built a new life rooted in tolerance, cooperation, and education. To Gormleth, this was an unforgivable inversion of everything she believed. Her death came not at the hands of a powerful wizard, but through the intervention of those she underestimated. A Pukwoodgi named William delivered the fatal blow, a fitting irony for a witch who believed herself superior by birth alone. Gormleth's end underscores a recurring pattern among dark wizards, an inability to recognize power that exists outside their chosen hierarchies. Though she never commanded followers or reshaped governments, Gormleth Gaunt's influence echoed through generations. The Gaunt family's descent into instability, abuse, and obsession continued, eventually giving rise to Voldemort himself. Her legacy is a reminder that darkness cultivated in private spaces can be just as destructive as darkness unleashed upon the world. Morgana occupies a rare position in wizarding history, existing at the crossroads of myth and recorded magical fact. Unlike many dark wizards, whose lives are documented through ministry records or eyewitness accounts, Morgana's story is layered through legend, folklore, and selective canon. Yet her inclusion among Chocolate Frog cards confirms her historical reality within the wizarding world. Referred to as a very powerful dark witch, Morgana's reputation endured for centuries before the modern magical era. She lived during a time when magic was less codified, when ancient spellcraft blurred the boundaries between wizardry, ritual, and elemental forces. Power in this era was often attributed to those who could command nature itself. Morgana is most famously associated with Merlin, widely regarded as the most powerful wizard in history. Their rivalry alone speaks to her capabilities. To stand as Merlin's adversary required extraordinary magical strength, adaptability, and intellect. Morgana was not a subordinate force, but a rival operating on a comparable scale. Accounts attribute to Morgana abilities such as shape-shifting, illusion, healing, and elemental manipulation. Within the framework of modern wizarding theory, these talents suggest mastery of advanced transfiguration, charms, and magic that may predate standardized spellcasting. Her magic was fluid rather than formulaic, shaped by intent rather than incantation. Morgana's darkness is often portrayed through betrayal, manipulation, and ambition. She used beauty and intellect as tools, weaving deception as effectively as any curse. Unlike later dark wizards, who relied heavily on fear, Morgana's power often lay in persuasion and psychological dominance. Her moral ambiguity across different accounts complicates her classification as purely evil, yet the wizarding world's choice to memorialize her as a dark witch suggests that her actions ultimately aligned with harm rather than protection. The persistence of her legend indicates that her influence extended beyond individual conflicts into cultural memory. Morgana's era reminds us that dark power once operated on a mythic scale. Wizards like her shaped stories that blurred into legend, making it difficult to separate history from symbolism. Yet the fear and respect associated with her name endure, a testament to the magnitude of her magical presence. Where Morgana represents ancient mythic power, Gellert Grindelwald embodies modern ideological darkness. Born in the late 19th century, Grindelwald emerged in a world already structured by ministries, laws, and international cooperation. His brilliance lay not in rejecting these systems, but in manipulating them. Grindelwald was exceptionally intelligent, charismatic, and visionary. He believed sincerely that wizard kind should rule openly, not hide in secrecy. His slogan, advocating the greater good, allowed him to justify extreme measures while maintaining the appearance of moral purpose. This framing attracted followers who might otherwise have recoiled from overt cruelty. His mastery of the Elder Wand elevated his raw magical power to unprecedented levels. Yet it was his ability to inspire belief that made him truly dangerous. Grindelwald understood that ideas could mobilize faster and more effectively than fear alone. He built a movement rather than a cult of terror. His relationship with Albus Dumbledore reveals the depth of his intellect. The bond they shared was rooted in mutual recognition of brilliance. That Dumbledore, later regarded as the greatest wizard of his age, once saw Grindelwald as an equal speaks volumes about Grindelwald's potential. Grindelwald's reign of influence reshaped wizarding politics across Europe. He manipulated fear of muggles, desire for freedom, and resentment of secrecy to consolidate power. Even after his defeat, the ideological ripples of his movement continued to influence extremist thought. Lord Voldemort represents the culmination of dark magical evolution, where Herpo pioneered forbidden rituals and Grindelwald weaponized ideology. Voldemort combined both approaches with unprecedented technical mastery. Born Tom Riddle, he displayed extraordinary talent from childhood, coupled with a profound absence of empathy. Voldemort's power lay in his willingness to fragment his soul repeatedly, creating multiple Horcruxes to anchor himself to life. This act went far beyond Herpo's original transgression, representing a total rejection of natural limits. Each Horcrux weakened his humanity while strengthening his fear of death. He mastered legilimency, occlumency, parseltongue, and advanced spellcraft, excelling in dueling, curses, and psychological manipulation. His name itself became a weapon, instilling terror through avoidance. Fear sustained his authority as much as magic did. Yet Voldemort's downfall illustrates the paradox of dark power. In his obsession with control and immortality, he underestimated forces he could not dominate, such as loyalty, sacrifice, and love. His technical brilliance could not compensate for his spiritual emptiness. When examining these dark wizards together, a pattern emerges. Each sought to overcome vulnerability through power, yet each was ultimately undone by the very limitations they refused to acknowledge. Their legacies persist not as triumphs, but as warnings etched into wizarding history. If you've enjoyed this slow, immersive journey through the darkest figures in magical history, consider liking the video and subscribing to Restricted Section Lore. Your support helps keep these quiet explorations of the wizarding world alive, offering a place to rest, reflect, and drift into the deeper corners of magical history. The wizarding world did not recover cleanly from the eras shaped by these dark wizards. Power, once unleashed at such scales, has a way of lingering in customs, laws, and unspoken fears. Long after names fade from daily conversation, their influence remains embedded in how magic is taught, regulated, and feared. To understand the true magnitude of dark power, it is necessary to linger on what came after each of them, because consequence is the final measure of strength. In the centuries following Herpo the Foul, magical scholarship developed a deep aversion to experimentation involving the soul. Entire branches of inquiry were abandoned or sealed away, not because they were poorly understood, but because they were understood too well. The knowledge that a wizard could fracture their own soul and survive fundamentally altered how death was viewed within magical culture. Mortality was no longer absolute, and that realization haunted scholars who feared what others might attempt if desperation outweighed ethics. Libraries quietly removed references, professors spoke in euphemisms, and ministries later codified strict prohibitions, not only on Horcrux creation, but on even discussing the theoretical mechanics behind it. This silence was not ignorance, it was containment. Herpo's power extended into the realm of absence, shaping what wizarding society refused to teach as much as what it preserved. Salazar Slytherin's legacy proved even more resilient because it was woven into everyday life. Hogwarts students continued to be sorted under criteria influenced by his values. Ambition and cunning were praised alongside bravery and intellect, but the shadow of blood purity lingered in subtle ways. Students internalized hierarchies long before they understood their origins, demonstrating how ideological dark magic can persist without spells being cast. Over time, Slytherin House produced witches and wizards who rejected his views entirely, yet they still carried the weight of association. This unintended consequence further demonstrates Salazar's power. Even opposition defined itself in relation to him. When a dark wizard shapes identity itself, resistance becomes another form of legacy. The scars left by Ekrizdis were physical, emotional, and institutional. Azkaban became a symbol of fear so potent that its mere mention could end conversations. Generations of witches and wizards accepted the prison's existence without questioning its origins, normalizing suffering as a tool of justice. This acceptance may be Echrisdes's most disturbing achievement. He made despair bureaucratic. Even when Dementors were eventually removed, the damage had already been done. Survivors carried trauma, families lived with unspoken grief, and the prison's reputation endured. Echrisdes demonstrated that dark wizards need not be remembered by name to exert control. They only need to shape systems that outlive them. Gormlaith Gaunt's impact manifested differently, but no less destructively. Her methods mirrored those seen later in abusive magical households, where power was enforced through isolation and fear rather than overt violence. The Gaunt family's continued degeneration illustrates how unchecked fanaticism corrodes inward before it ever turns outward. By the time Voldemort was born into the Gaunt lineage, instability was normalized. Poverty, cruelty, and obsession had replaced any genuine sense of heritage. Gormlaith's belief that blood purity justified domination created conditions that made Voldemort's worldview possible. In this sense, her power extended forward in time, shaping not events, but psychological inheritance. Morgana's influence persisted through story rather than policy. Tales of her power shaped how witches understood ancient magic, reinforcing the idea that some forces lay beyond regulation. While this inspired caution, it also inspired curiosity. Young scholars studied her legends, not only to fear them, but to understand how such power could exist at all. This duality made Morgana uniquely powerful. She occupied both warning and aspiration. Her legend reminded witches that magic once flowed differently, and that modern constraints, while protective, also limited what could be achieved. This tension between safety and possibility continues to define magical scholarship. Grindelwald's aftermath was felt most strongly in politics. Ministries became more centralized, surveillance increased, and international cooperation tightened. These changes were framed as protection, but they also reflected fear. Grindelwald proved that ideology could mobilize faster than armies, forcing governments to respond preemptively to belief itself. The secrecy that Grindelwald sought to dismantle became more rigid after his defeat. In attempting to overthrow the Statute of Secrecy, he paradoxically strengthened it. His power reshaped governance, not through victory, but through the terror of near success. Voldemort's fall marked the end of an era, but not the end of fear. His return from apparent death shattered confidence in permanence. Wizards who had believed him gone forever were forced to confront the reality that dark power could survive invisibly for years. This realization altered how threats were assessed, leading to heightened suspicion and vigilance. The destruction of Voldemort's Horcruxes restored balance, but at a cost. Knowledge once again proved dangerous. The wizarding world learned that ignorance could not guarantee safety, and that some evils required understanding to be defeated. This uneasy relationship with forbidden knowledge continues to shape magical education. Across all these figures, a pattern becomes undeniable. The most powerful dark wizards were not those who cast the flashiest spells, but those who altered how magic itself was understood. They redefined boundaries, normalized fear, and forced societies to reorganize around their existence. Power, in the dark sense, is ultimately transformative. It changes how people think, what they fear, and what they believe is possible. These dark wizards succeeded not because they were invincible, but because they reshaped the world in ways that outlasted them. And so, when we speak of the most powerful dark wizards in wizarding history, we are not simply cataloguing villains. We are tracing the evolution of fear, ambition, and defiance within magic itself. Their stories endure because they reveal uncomfortable truths about what magic can become when restraint gives way to obsession. If you find yourself returning to these stories, letting them play softly as you rest or drift towards sleep, you are engaging in the same act as countless witches and wizards before you, remembering so that the darkest paths are not walked again. If this journey through the deeper layers of wizarding history has been meaningful, consider liking the video and subscribing to Restricted Section Lore, where the quiet corners of magic are explored with care, patience, and respect for the power they still hold. Another figure whose name surfaces only rarely, yet whose influence reaches deep into the foundations of dark magical theory, is Rasidian. Unlike dark wizards who sought immortality, domination, or ideological reform, Rasidian's power lay in his mastery over despair itself. His story survives not through conquest or legacy, but through a singular, cautionary account preserved in magical folklore and educational texts. Rasidian lived in what is described only as an ancient time, an era when the Patronus charm was still newly understood and rarely mastered. He resided in a black fortress surrounded by forest, a place guarded entirely by Dementors. This detail alone suggests extraordinary power. Dementors do not serve willingly, nor can they be controlled through force alone. That they remained clustered around Rasidian implies either an affinity for the despair he generated, or an ability to attract them through sustained darkness. The presence of Dementors fundamentally altered the surrounding region. Villages nearby lived under constant threat, forced to teach even their youngest members the Patronus charm as a matter of survival. In this way, Rasidian shaped an entire community's relationship with magic. Fear was not episodic, but structural, built into daily life and education. Rasidian himself was a highly competent wizard, skilled in curses, enchantments, and dark experimentation. Yet despite his power, there was one spell he could not master: the Patronus charm. This failure is deeply significant. The Patronus is not a spell of raw force, but of emotional integrity. It requires genuine positive emotion, not merely the memory of it, and cannot be sustained through deception or intellectual mimicry. When Rasidian attempted to cast the Patronus, the result was catastrophic. Instead of producing a protective manifestation, his spell conjured maggots that consumed him alive. This outcome stands as one of the most explicit demonstrations of magic enforcing moral boundaries. Power alone was insufficient. Competence without humanity led to self-destruction. Rasidian's death revealed something crucial about dark power. There are limits that cannot be overcome through study or cruelty. Some forms of magic act as mirrors, reflecting the caster's inner state rather than their intent. In attempting to wield hope as a weapon, Rasidian was undone by his inability to feel it. His story endured not because of conquest, but because it taught restraint. Generations of witches and wizards learned that certain spells could not be forced. This lesson shaped magical pedagogy, reinforcing the idea that ethical alignment mattered as much as technical skill. In this way, Rasidian's power lay in failure rather than success. Equally important, though often overlooked, is the figure of Owl Bullock, a dark wizard whose influence emerged not through spectacle, but through documentation. Owl Bullock is remembered primarily as the author of Secrets of the Darkest Art, one of the most dangerous books ever written. Its contents were deemed so corruptive that even the restricted section of the Hogwarts library was considered insufficient containment. The act of writing such a book represents a different kind of dark ambition. Bullock sought not only to practice forbidden magic, but to systematize it. He translated taboo rituals into replicable processes, lowering the barrier to entry for future dark practitioners. This dissemination of knowledge exponentially increased the threat posed by dark magic. Secrets of the Darkest Art contain detailed instructions on Horcrux creation, including the necessary acts, consequences, and irreversible damage to the soul. The precision of this information strongly suggests first-hand experience. It is widely inferred that Bullock either created a Horcrux himself or worked closely with those who had. Bullock's true power lay in authorship. By committing these secrets to writing, he ensured that dark magic would outlive individual practitioners. Knowledge, once recorded, becomes resilient. It can be hidden, but not erased. This permanence makes Bullock one of the most dangerous dark wizards in history, despite the scarcity of information about his personal deeds. The fact that Albus Dumbledore removed the book from circulation underscores its threat. Dumbledore understood that some knowledge corrupts by existing, regardless of intent. Hermione Granger's brief exposure to the book later confirmed its repellent nature. Even those seeking to destroy Horcruxes were unsettled by its contents. Bullock demonstrates that dark power does not always manifest through violence. It can emerge through pedagogy, through the careful articulation of how to violate reality itself. In doing so, he transformed isolated evil into reproducible methodology. When viewed alongside figures like Harpo, Voldemort, and Grindelwald, Raxidian and Bullock reveal the full spectrum of dark power. Some dark wizards act directly upon the world, others act upon minds, systems, and future generations. All reshape magic by expanding what is considered possible. At this point in wizarding history, patterns become impossible to ignore. Dark wizards consistently emerge during periods of uncertainty, fear, or transition. They exploit instability, offering certainty through control. Their power grows where institutions falter or ethics are treated as obstacles rather than safeguards. Yet just as consistently, their power collapses under its own weight. Isolation breeds blindness. Obsession narrows perspective. The refusal to accept limitation ultimately ensures failure. These truths repeat across centuries, regardless of era or individual. What remains after their fall is not relief but caution. The wizarding world does not return to innocence. It moves forward with scars, adjusting laws, customs, and education to prevent recurrence. This adaptive response is itself a form of power, one built collectively rather than imposed. In reflecting on the most powerful dark wizards in wizarding history, it becomes clear that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They believed themselves exceptional, separate from the rules governing others. Magic, however, remembers balance. These stories endure not to glorify darkness, but to illuminate its mechanics. By understanding how dark power rises, how it sustains itself, and how it ultimately collapses, the wizarding world preserves its ability to resist repetition. If this exploration of forbidden knowledge and its consequences has accompanied you through rest or reflection, remember that understanding is the first defense against repetition. Like and subscribe to Restricted Section Lore for more calm, long-form journeys into the quiet, shadowed history of the wizarding world. When viewed as a whole, the progression of dark wizards across wizarding history begins to resemble a slow evolving dialogue between ambition and limitation. Each era produces figures who believe they have finally solved the problem of weakness, whether that weakness is death, obscurity, fear, or loss of control. Yet each solution introduces a new fracture, one that widens with time, and ultimately consumes its creator. In the earlier stages, darkness emerged through experimentation. Wizards like Herpo the Foul operated without precedent, without law, and without meaningful opposition. Their power grew in silence, fueled by curiosity, unchecked by consequence. Magic, still wild and malleable, responded dramatically to those willing to push it beyond ethical boundaries. This era reminds us that the most dangerous magic often arises not from hatred, but from unrestrained inquiry divorced from responsibility. As magical communities expanded, darkness adapted. Salazar Slytherin represents the moment when dark power learned to disguise itself as protection. His fear of muggles was not irrational in its origin, but it metastasized into exclusionary doctrine. By embedding his beliefs into Hogwarts itself, Salazar ensured that his worldview would be debated, resisted, and echoed for centuries. His influence demonstrates how ideology can outlast spell work, shaping generations without a wand ever being raised. Isolation marks the next evolution. Wizards like Ekrisdis withdrew entirely from society, creating spaces where cruelty could flourish unobserved. These environments became laboratories of despair, places where magic absorbed emotion and reflected it back upon the world. The island that became Azkaban is not merely a prison, but a wound in the magical landscape, proof that places remember what is done within them. Then comes intimacy as a vector of power. Gormleth Gaunt did not need followers because she did not seek validation. Her certainty allowed her to justify domination within the smallest possible sphere: family. This form of darkness is among the hardest to confront because it hides behind blood ties and tradition. Its damage is cumulative, passed down like an inheritance, shaping future monsters long before they ever choose their path. Mythic darkness, embodied by Morgana, reflects a time when magic was inseparable from story. Her power was so vast that it resisted categorization, blurring lines between witch, deity, and legend. The wizarding world remembers her not through laws or ruins, but through narrative. This persistence underscores the potency of story as a carrier of fear and fascination, preserving power long after physical traces vanish. With Grindelwald, dark power learned persuasion. He recognized that modern magical society valued justification as much as force. By framing domination as moral necessity, he transformed ambition into movement. His defeat did not erase his ideas, it merely scattered them, forcing ministries to reckon with belief itself as a threat requiring governance. Voldemort, in contrast, represents convergence. He absorbed the lessons of all who came before him. From Herpo, he learned how to mutilate the soul. From Salazar, how to weaponize blood and identity. From Grindelwald, how fear consolidates power. What distinguished Voldemort was not originality, but synthesis. He became the most complete expression of dark magical evolution. Yet it was also Voldemort who most clearly demonstrated the inherent contradiction of dark power. In attempting to remove vulnerability entirely, he erased the very qualities that allow magic to respond with balance. Love, sacrifice, and loyalty became invisible to him, rendering him strategically blind. His fall illustrates that power pursued as insulation ultimately becomes isolation. Ratzidian's failure reinforces this truth from another angle. His inability to cast a Patronus was not a lack of knowledge, but a lack of alignment. Magic refused to obey him because obedience would have violated its own structure. This moment stands as one of the clearest examples of magic enforcing ethical boundaries without external intervention. Owl Bullock's legacy complicates matters further. Knowledge, once articulated, does not decay like a body or fade like memory. It waits. Bullock ensured that even if dark wizards were defeated, the instructions for becoming one would persist. This reality forced magical society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Suppression of knowledge can never be absolute. As a result, modern wizarding culture exists in a state of careful tension. Certain topics are taught obliquely, certain spells discussed only in theory, certain histories approached with restraint. This is not censorship born of fear alone, but stewardship born of experience. Each dark wizard added another reason for caution. Power, then, must be understood not as domination, but as influence over possibility. The most powerful dark wizards expanded what magic could do, even as they destroyed themselves, attempting to wield it without cost. Their stories endure because they map the edges of what should never be crossed. As you listen to these histories, perhaps drifting toward rest, it becomes clear why the wizarding world continues to tell them quietly, carefully, and without spectacle. These are not tales meant to inspire imitation, but understanding. Darkness thrives in ignorance, but it also feeds on obsession. Balance lies in knowing enough and no more. The restricted section exists for this reason. Knowledge is not evil, but it is heavy. It requires patience, humility, and restraint. The most powerful dark wizards lacked these qualities, and so their strength became their undoing. In remembering them, the wizarding world does not glorify their power. It contextualizes it, absorbs the lesson, and moves forward a little wiser than before. If this long measured journey through the shadowed history of magic has offered you a place to slow down, to listen, or to rest, consider supporting restricted section lore by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. More quiet explorations await, always guided by curiosity, care, and respect for the power of story. In the quiet hours when the wizarding world itself seems to slow, these stories take on a different texture. They are no longer warnings etched in stone or names printed in history books, but low-burning embers of memory, glowing softly beneath the surface of time. Dark power, when examined at this pace, reveals itself not as spectacle, but as atmosphere. Consider how places remember. The stones of Hogwarts still carry the echoes of Salazar Slytherin's footsteps, even as laughter and learning fill its corridors. The island of Azkaban, battered by wind and sea, continues to feel heavy, as though the air itself has learned despair. Forests once touched by ancient magic still feel watchful, their silence shaped by what once passed through them. Dark wizards rarely vanish completely. They settle into the world like sediment, altering its texture in ways that can be felt, but not always seen. Magic responds to intention, but it also responds to repetition. A single cruel act leaves a mark, but sustained cruelty reshapes reality. This is why the most powerful dark wizards are remembered not for isolated moments, but for patterns. They returned again and again to the same ideas: control, purity, immortality, certainty. Over time, these ideas thickened, becoming frameworks rather than impulses. When students study defensive magic, They are unknowingly studying the failures of dark wizards. Every shield charm refined, every protective enchantment standardized, exists because someone once sought to break it. Defense is the shadow cast by offense. In this way, dark power indirectly strengthens the very structures that resist it. Sleepy minds often drift toward origins, and it is here that Herpo the Foul lingers most clearly. Not as a figure, but as a question. What happens when curiosity loses its moral anchor? His story is quiet, almost empty of detail, and that emptiness invites reflection. It is the silence after a forbidden spell is cast, when the world does not end, but something inside it changes forever. Salazar Slytherin's presence feels different. He lingers in debate, in argument, in the uneasy awareness that institutions can carry prejudice long after their founders are gone. His power hums beneath sorting ceremonies and house rivalries, subtle and persistent. It is the reminder that darkness can wear the mask of tradition. Echrisdis is felt rather than remembered. Few know his name, yet millions know the fear he created. His legacy teaches that anonymity does not weaken dark power. In some cases, it strengthens it. When horror has no face, it becomes harder to challenge. Gormleth Gaunt's shadow is narrow but deep. It follows bloodlines, not borders. Her story feels claustrophobic, enclosed, heavy with inevitability. It reminds us that darkness does not always arrive roaring. Sometimes it whispers, day after day, until resistance feels impossible. Morgana drifts through memory like mist. Her power belongs to an older world, one less defined by rules and more by resonance. She reminds us that magic once answered directly to emotion, desire, and story. In her wake, modern magic feels safer, but smaller. Grindelwald's era hums with speeches, symbols, and banners. His darkness was articulate, persuasive, almost elegant. Listening closely, one can hear how easily hope can be bent when certainty is offered in exchange for freedom. Voldemort's presence, by contrast, is sharp and cold. His magic feels engineered, stripped of warmth, optimized for dominance. Even now, his name carries tension, a tightening in the chest. He represents the end point of dark efficiency and the emptiness it leaves behind. Ratzidian and Owl Bullock linger at the edges of awareness, one as a failure that taught restraint, the other as a warning about knowledge itself. Together, they remind us that not all dark power announces itself loudly. Some of it waits patiently, ink on a page, lesson in a classroom, caution passed quietly from mentor to student. As these thoughts settle, they do not demand wakefulness. They invite stillness. The wizarding world survives because it remembers slowly, deliberately, and with care. Darkness loses much of its power when it is understood without fascination. And so, these stories are told softly, not to alarm, but to accompany. Like the steady crackle of a distant fire, or the muted echo of footsteps in an old corridor, they are meant to be felt, more than analysed. A reminder that, even in a world shaped by magic, restraint remains the most powerful spell of all. If you find yourself returning to these quiet histories, letting them play, as the day fades, know that you are engaging with the wizarding world as it was meant to be remembered. Gently, thoughtfully, and without hurry. Like and subscribe to Restricted Section Lore for more calm, immersive journeys into the deeper layers of magical history, always told with patience, atmosphere, and respect for the shadows they contain. As we approach the end of this story, you may find yourself dozing off to sleep, or becoming dreary-eyed, or maybe you're already asleep. In either case, it is time for me to fade away and let the dreams take it from here. Have a good night and enjoy some crackles from the fireplace to help you drift further into your deep slumber.